1, 2, 3, yeah! This is Amari Purple Talk. Yes. Welcome to episode 63 of Amari Purple Talk, a podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist. Thank you for once again tuning in. Please leave your comments in the comments section below, and please download on your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. All right, so that little introduction after the theme song, little tribute to the one and only great Dr. Jockenstein, DJ for WESL back in the day. That's the AM station where we got our funk. That's where we got our funk from. And until it later on and around in the 90s became a gospel station. But basically, part of our theme today is going to be radio, particularly the Quiet Storm. Remember back in the day, you had FM stations like KKSS FM. And of course, we also had Magic 108 a little bit later. I think it became Magic 105 later. Living out in the Bay Area, we had KSOL back in the day. And the Quiet Storm, you know, it was banging. Had, you know, of course, all the Prince ballads. Had Luther, had Patti LaBelle, Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, Teddy Pendergrass. The list goes on. So we're going to kind of touch on that just a little bit in relationship to the classic Prince ballad, Adore. And, of course, yesterday, I did my Twitter thread on Adore. You can check that out. Hashtag Prince Twitter thread. Hashtag Sign of the Times Super Deluxe Edition or Super Deluxe. And check it out. Also, check out the other threads by a lot of great contributors on a lot of the other songs on the original Sign of the Times album. Prince podcasters, writers, fans, you name it. Everybody threw down on their takes, opinions, thesis, breakdowns. Lots of great stuff. I'm listening to the album with even fresher ears, having learned so much from everyone that has participated. Again, thanks to everyone involved. Thanks to DJ UMB and Edgar Cruz for once again inviting me to participate. And basically, bottom line, anytime you want me to participate in a Twitter thread, I'm in. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on. And it's kind of expanding my thoughts on the song Adore this episode. By all means, first check out the Twitter thread. I'm going to kind of not necessarily repeat it verbatim. There's been kind of hints that we'll do like an audio version of the Twitter thread at some point. But nothing's been worked out yet. So I kind of don't want to do it word for word. I want you to kind of check it out because that's a special place for it. But based on a lot of the comments and reactions to it, I thought I would kind of do like a bonus features and just kind of add some things that, you only get when you do a thread. It only gives you like about 25 posts that you can use. So it was some things I had to leave out of it. Again, plus based on some of the reactions to it, kind of open some eyes here and there, and some things like, hey, yeah, you're right, and kind of open my eyes to some things as well. So going to just expand on it a bit. And later on, we're actually going to also do my review of the live DVD from the Sign of the Times Super Deluxe Edition. I've been meaning to do a separate video just like the rest of the deluxe set, which you can check out on YouTube. But things have been so crazy this week. Again, the essentially non-essential essential gig. So there wasn't a time to do a separate video for that for YouTube. So we're just going to tackle that here on the podcast, which does end up on YouTube. So YouTubers, you can still check it out as well. So those would be the two main topics today. And again, we're going to start with Adore. And basically, Sign of the Times is my favorite Prince album. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great Prince albums after that. In fact, probably one of the latest, Artificial Age. Kind of as time goes by, it could rank maybe kind of want to give some props to 1999 too. So maybe someday second, but often third on my list would be Artificial Age, to give representation to the later era. But Sign of the Times is hands down my favorite Prince album. Since 87 when it dropped, just, where things were in 1987 for me, that has always been the background to my life, the soundtrack to my life. And then even later on, moving to California, and then not long after that, the Sign of the Times film dropped. So, this will always have a very special place in Pantheon of favorite albums. So, but again, I was asked to do Adore, and in tackling that subject, it's kind of difficult to figure out how to write about this song. While it's a great song, and it's definitely one of my favorite Prince ballads, and a favorite to many, it doesn't have sort of the weight of, say some of the classic ballad, like Do Me Baby or something like that. The beautiful ones, or, even some of the classic hits, like When Doves Cry, Kiss. It doesn't have like a huge backstory associated with it. But it's a great ballad. And to me, it's not a knockoff. It's not album filler to me. But I thought, one of the challenges was in sort of its inspiration, whether it was lyrically or, vocal arrangements or just the overall arrangement of the song. And those roots can be traced to Luther Vandross and Patti LaBelle. In fact, if you check out the liner notes to Prince, the hits, and the B-sides, the liner notes written by Alan Leeds, he mentions that this was sort of inspired by pretty much, I guess, what Prince was listening to at the time. And when you do factor in the backstory of how this album overall was created, those months in Sunset Sound Studios, and sort of this thing to where, he's put the revolution in his rearview mirror, and, he's kind of getting back into the produced, written, arranged, and performed by mode. He's in a good mood. He's still with Susanna at this point. And, it's just in this overwhelming state of bliss. And, as kind of even around, October, November, He's still on that creative buzz, still on that romantic buzz. And yeah, probably just inspired by listening to, say, Patty or Luther, you get this song Adore. And when you look at the fact that it was not a single, but it did get radio play on black radio stations, and primarily the Quiet Storm format. And, radio here in the United States is different than radio anywhere else. And it's a thing to where, here, yeah, there are pop stations, there's R&B stations, there's hip hop stations, there's jazz and country and blues, rock, whatever. There's pretty much a station for everything. Nowadays, even though you have that sort of segregated format, and even with, pop, where, maybe something a little more R&B does cross over, or something country crosses over, and it becomes like a pop hit at that point, it is all controlled by one or two entities. I know at one point, Clear Channel and Radio 1 basically had all of the radio stations, or the majority of the radio stations across the United States. And it became a thing to where your program director on a national scale decides the playlist for what you listen to. So basically, long story short, the junk that you're listening to, or the junk that you're forced to like or forced to listen to, is being decided by somebody in an office somewhere and doesn't live in the community where you live. Years ago, it was a different story. Radio stations were a little bit more independent. The DJs primarily lived in and around the community, and, pretty much had their ear to the streets to get a gauge of what people were listening to, what the people wanted. And a lot of times it wasn't just about the singles. By the late 60s, early 70s, in New York, legendary DJ Murray the K, the guy that, when the Beatles came over, was kind of the one that, was getting all the exclusives and the interviews and really pushing the Beatles music on the New York airwaves. By the late 60s and early 70s, when albums were becoming more, creative, they were more like an art form, or they were more conceptual, then he would play the album tracks. So it wasn't just about the singles. He would play the album tracks. And this was a format that both rock and R&B radio, they followed that formula. And, when it comes to a lot of songs that you're familiar with, you realize that most of them weren't even singles. They weren't even on the charts. It was just that the DJ loved that track. And if you didn't have the album and you heard that track, then that was the track that, like, oh, well, I better go get this album. First you got the hit single that, it's in the top 20, it's in the top 10, top 5, number 1, whatever. And then you hear the slamming album track, that's like, oh, well, I better go run out and get this album. So, like, for example, for me, I didn't realize till about maybe 10, 15 years ago that the Isley Brothers' Voyage to Atlantis was never a single. But that was in constant play, from as a kid to a teenager to an adult through now. If you hear it on the radio now, it's like, you just assumed it was a hit. You assumed, oh, that was, number 5 back in 1970, whatever. And it was just an album track, but the DJs loved it and played it. Now, also, too, this thing called the Quiet Storm format, and that was invented in around the mid-late 70s. And it was started by DJ Melvin Lindsay. Started off as an intern. He was a student at Howard University. Him and one of his classmates, Jack Schuler, they were filling in for a DJ that couldn't make it in that evening. So they started this format in which they would just play classic R&B slow songs of the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and they basically named the format after actually a Smokey Robinson song. Again, I didn't know. I thought the Quiet Storm format was just unique to, where I was living, the St. Louis area. I thought it was just unique to that. And I remember, I don't know, maybe late teens or something, because I'd never heard the song before. But, you had Smokey Robinson's song, Quiet Storm. I had never heard it, when it was out, when it was released. So, I'm hearing it on the Quiet Storm. Actually, they would use it here. They use that song, like it was like a theme song. And I was like, oh, that was cool. Smokey Robinson wrote a theme song for him. Realizing it, this thing was written like 10 years earlier. It was, came out in 75. They just took the name and just created the format with it. And like I said, radio stations all across the country, or R&B stations, picked up on this format. And, I realized I got a lot of response from people overseas that never realized that. It was like, oh, well, music is music. We heard this song and that song. And, it didn't matter what the format was, whether it was, the Isley Brothers over here and the Pet Shop Boys over there. It was all the same. It's just music. While here, it's this sort of, oh, it's R&B and it's over here, and it's rock and it's over there. And, primarily music lovers, regardless of what color you are, it's music to us. But these radio stations, having been segregated over the years. Now, it had always been that way, but the thing I wanted to expand on historically, there's actually two reference points I would recommend. Number one is seeking out Nelson George's book, The Death of Rhythm and Blues. Seek that out. And also Alan Leeds' book, There Was a Time. Check those out. That gives great historical reference to how things were back in the day regarding radio, whether it was white radio, black radio, and in the case of Nelson George's book, a very great documentation of how corporations by the 70s had taken over radio to the point to where that ended that freedom of, oh, let's play this album track, to where like there's this universal playlist that, it's across the board, and further driving the wedge between color and music. Another thing to check out, it's very hard to find. I've got like a crappy VHS taping of it, The History of Rock and Roll. Now there's other documentaries titled that, so if you do an Amazon search, you'll find those. And I think I might have seen one or two of those, and they're not bad documentaries. But to me, this one that originally aired on PBS is the one to seek out. especially the second part of that. Part two focuses on the early 60s. This is after, Elvis went into the army. This is, after Chuck Berry went to jail, Little Richard found religion. Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin. So basically rock and roll, the hardcore stuff had kind of faded to the wayside. Then you started kind of getting this sort of homogenized version of rock with Fabian and Paul Anka, Frankie Avalon, and that stuff. But this was the beginning of the age of the producer. So you had people like Lieber and Stroller that, did stuff for Big Mama Thornton, wrote songs for the Coasters, but, made big money writing for Elvis as well. But they also started by the early 60s writing for the Drifters, writing for Benny King. You also had Phil Spector coming along with, basically Darlene Love singing everything, but, credited to the Crystals. You also had the Ronettes and Righteous Brothers. You also had Jerry Goffin, Carole King, that was writing for the Shirelles. So it was the age of the producer, but through these black artists, or primarily black artists, it was capturing the people, in black homes and white homes. They each had those records. It stopped being about, oh, well, here's the black record, and then we're going to find some white artist to cover it. You kind of got a little bit of that with the British invasion early on, but the fact that those acts could write their own songs, their sort of fight for independence in that regard won out over having to do covers, which was mainly their stage act before they got their record deal. So if you can seek out and find that documentary, for years I've tried to get it from PBS. At one point they were selling the VHS. This is years ago when I started asking about it. But primarily you had to be an educator in order to buy it. Like you could only use it for teaching purposes. It's like, wow, really? And I think then it was like nearly $200 or something like that for the set. And I was like, man, that's a bit, pricey for me then. So, but again, you still can't find it. It's not like in this wide commercial realm. I think even I tried looking in the PBS store online and still couldn't turn it up. But there are segments of it on YouTube. And like I said, the part that was really telling for me is, Benny King talking about, how, you had, your Lieber and Strollers, your Phil Spectors, Goffin and King, but, these artists were interpreting their songs. And again, they were capturing a people. They were enjoying this crossover success. And then the British invasion happened. Now, it's nothing wrong with the British invasion. They were pretty generous in saying, look, we were influenced by Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Motown, when a lot of artists over here, were pretty reluctant to admit that. But you had the sort of the record companies, or, whether it was I wouldn't say the Ed Sullivan Show really, but other TV shows, it was kind of this thing, or the record companies were kind of like, they were the ones sort of driving the wedge, further apart. And that was sort of the beginning of that. But you still had where Motown was still competitive. You still had James Brown, who was so far to the left of what everybody was doing that they were able to survive the whole British invasion onslaught. But those acts where there was the Beach Boys had to fight to compete, but, the Drifters and the Shirelles and all the other groups, like I said, they kind of ended up falling to the wayside, because of that, what the industry was doing to drive that wedge in. It's like, oh, here's these British acts coming over. This is the new thing. Let's sweep that under the rug. But like I said, it took independent stations. It took independent labels like Motown, like Stax. It took an artist like James Brown, and heck, if Sam Cooke was able to live, that would have been the other thing too. But, those were the forces that were able to be competitive and still manage to grab a people, not just one particular segment of the American population. So that was sort of the beginning of that. And then by the time you got to the 70s, this sort of corporate takeover of radio stations across the country and sort of homogenizing the radio formats across the board. It wasn't just black radio, rock radio too. Now, just everything now. You turn it on now here and it's always the same 10 songs. And once upon a time it wasn't like that. And, it was just a great time. And, it's also, you take an artist like Prince for granted because he had the massive success. We as, black radio, we embraced it early, Again, I remember Soft and Wet getting radio airplay. And then when it came to other stuff, the B-sides later on, How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore? That was played on black radio. And I think, it just became sort of the sharing of ideas, really. You make a cassette for somebody, or just we as fans, regardless of where you're living, you find the songs anyway. That's the beauty of it. You're the one that discovers it. It's like sometimes you feel like you're kind of the only one that knows about it, but it's great when you find out that somebody across the Atlantic or, somebody in South America or somebody in Australia or somebody in Africa, hears the same thing that you're hearing. And it's like, oh, you love that song too. That's great. Love it. But at the same time, too, we also drank the Purple Rain Kool-Aid. Too, we're looking at First Avenue and like, oh, well, this must be what Minneapolis is like the whole time. And there's a different reality. They had to fight to get into those venues. That part of the movie was true, where it's like, oh, they've got this many acts. But I think what they didn't tell you was that the competition, not only was it, Flight Time versus Grand Central, that's part of the legend, but, it's harder for black bands to get the venues. And if it wasn't for the places they were able to play in, it would have been harder for them to get to where they are now, Here, it's the same, it's the same thing. It's, the country bands get favored, or the whatever rock cover or pop top 40 bands, I know when I was coming up, there was only three of the biggest bands, black bands here, I know me and a friend of mine, we were, we would get, people that either were good, they just weren't serious, or people that were serious, but they just weren't good. And, but the three best bands in the city had the best players in it. And they were fighting for dominance. And even say like by the 90s, when those three bands went to the wayside, one or two new bands came up and, got some pretty good success locally as far as getting the venues. But, it's always It's always the country bands and the rock bands and the pop top 40 bands that are getting all the work. There used to be a really heavy reggae scene here, and that has virtually disappeared off the face of the Midwest landscape. You know, um, but the reality was that in Minneapolis, Prince wasn't getting that respect because there weren't, you know, a multitude of black radio stations to break him in. You just had that one that, was, you hear all the stories. It was off the air the minute the sun went down. So, there was that kind of struggle for respect in one's own hometown. Again, the rest of us took it for granted. Like I said, here, at any given time, there were 3, 4, 5 black radio stations, at least 3, that were consistent, regardless if it was AM or FM, in the 70s and 80s, and like I said, by the time everything really became FM, you still, again, at any given time, you had at least 3 that could at least get the sounds out to the people. And, so you take a song like Adore, that again, it's a great song, and people do find it. Even non-Prince fans, because of the Quiet Storm format. Either they're familiar with it, or if you play it to someone for the first time, a lot of women get it. They get it. They get that song. A lot of times it becomes a gateway. But, again, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle of not only the classic material, there's also the weight of the Sign of the Times album itself. There's so many great songs on it that, you kind of take it for granted. It's like, oh, Adore, yeah, it's great. And the fact that he didn't really play it live a lot. And, kind of wonder if it was because his focus changed. Because by the time you get to December, there's the focus on the Black Album, which then segued into focus onto the Love Sexy album. So by the time he got to tour the United States and even Europe again with the Love Sexy album, the focus was on that material. So Adore kind of became abbreviated at that point. And I think the definitive live version will be found on that live New Year's Eve DVD on the Super Deluxe edition. And I also like the version on the One Night Alone live. That's really the first time I've heard it pretty much close to its entirety. And even though it's just done on the piano, it's still great. So for me, next to all the truncated live versions I've heard, that was my favorite version of it live. Now, the version on the live New Year's Eve DVD, that's the favorite. So, hopefully it will, like I said, again, you'll find it. If you're a fan, you found it already. Again, if you're new to Prince and new to understanding what his music was about, if you're into ballads, that's one you can't go wrong with. And it's definitely in the pantheon of his great ballads. So by all means, check it out, give it another listen. Check out my Twitter thread, which really covers it. Like I said, this was sort of the bonus features that I couldn't fit onto the Twitter thread. But leave me a comment, let me know what you think, And with that, we're going to now talk about the New Year's Eve live DVD of the Super Deluxe edition. And this was basically something that had been circulating as a bootleg, but you didn't see it in its entirety. I think people have seen bits and pieces of it over the years, but never the whole thing. So when they put this together, they took the time to go through the footage and properly edit it and master the sound to it. And I'll tell you, it is great. For me, because over here in the United States, we didn't get to see the Sign of the Times tour. So like I said, all the people in Utrecht, when I listen to that live DVD, I'm jealous because you guys are having fun. I mean, fun. More fun than humans are allowed to have. And, I love the heck out of this live Utrecht CD. But, I didn't get to see Prince again until the Lovesexy tour. And while that's a great show, and then that'll be a topic for another episode, and that was fun. To me, having, our only really real point of reference is the Sign of the Times movie. So, watching this DVD, it becomes apples and oranges now because, like I said, again, Sign of the Times as an album, nothing made being 2021 more fun than having that as the soundtrack to your life. And then, you make this life-changing move to a whole nother state, and you're still on the buzz of that album, but then, here comes the Sign of the Times film, and it's the next best thing to being at a concert. So, that film has sort of been etched into my consciousness. So, where, okay, I've been to see Purple Rain, I've seen the Lovesexy show in Oakland. I even saw the after show at the Warfield in San Francisco. Emancipation Tour, Musicology Tour. Those are all unique experiences. But when it comes to Sign of the Times, then the only point of reference as far as live performance is the movie. And of course, back then, we didn't see it as, oh, he reshot, 80% of this film at Paisley Park. We thought like, oh, well, wherever they said they shot the film, they shot the film. And, where was it? Paris, or I forget where they originally tried to get the film. The Prince didn't like the footage, so he reshot everything at Paisley Park. But that's what we think of as a Sign of the Times show. And even some of the bootlegs from some of the other places, they're in a lot of ways, give or take a note or two, or a guitar riff or two, or a vocal riff or two, was still pretty much identical to what was seen in the movie. Like I said, the Utrecht show, that CD there, that was fun. That is some fun being had on that CD right there. So, getting back to the New Year's Eve, to me, it's more authentic, and that's not putting the Sign of the Times film down. It has its place in Prince history, and again, it is etched in my conscious. And it's not like I look back on it and go, oh man, this is crap. This was shot at Paisley Park. Oh, what a cheat. No, it's still, my feelings towards that is the same now as it was back in November of 1987, sitting there twice in the theater watching this film. So that's there. But this, to me, it's more organic. I guess that's the word for it. Nothing's reshot, restaged. It's the show. Beginning to end, it's the show. And the fact that you get kind of the full set list and then some. You got the addition of Miles Davis, coming out. That's really the highlight for a lot of us when it comes to this particular show, is because that's the one with Miles Davis on it. During It's Going to Be a Beautiful Night. But you have things like a full performance of Adore, which, again, like I said, that's now my favorite live version. And probably next to the Sign of the Times film, this really illustrates, or this is kind of one of the first times you really get to see how much fun you can actually have at Paisley Park. During the 90s and, into the 21st century, it's not taken for granted, but, you kind of think of that's when people really started, because there were more shows, people starting to have actual, having fun at Paisley Park. And, we kind of forget this, the Sign of the Times film and this New Year's Eve show, even though it was a benefit, and I forget how much per head they were charging, like, I don't know if it was like a few $100 or $1,000 a person, I can't remember, but these are sort of the people that yes, that's sort of donating money for a worthy cause. Yeah, let's bring the children here, and have fun. But even despite that, they were having fun, and didn't look like there was like a, didn't look like a pretentious crowd at all. They looked like they were definitely into it. But you can tell the band is really having fun in this performance versus the film, where now you can kind of see it's rehearsed a bit, in the film, where, like I said, again, the New Year's Eve show is just organic. I just enjoyed that one from beginning to end, and just looking forward to, many repeat viewings. Really haven't had time to digest the DVD as much as I've had to digest, and still digesting the complete Sign of the Times set as a whole, with the vault tracks, the original album, even the packaging, the book, I still got to spend quality time with that too. But yeah, the estate and Warner Brothers have definitely knocked this whole thing out of the park. Again, it's been the gift that just keeps giving. Since September 25th, man, this has been probably the balancing act, because again, there's so much going on, and we're tired of everything. We're tired of the pandemic. We're tired of racism. We're tired of the fans, the flames of racism being fanned. Like I said, I'm in a situation where there's less of us, and we're working 3-4 times as hard, and that's taking a toll. And, then there are people that, aren't as fortunate to go back to work, and other people that are, at home for one reason or another, and, they're feeling the tired, and they're frustrated, and, everybody's money is kind of truncated a bit. And, so this set, at least for us Prince fans, and, a lot of people that are fans of the later eras, we're all in the same group, we're all in the same band. It's just that, like I said, for most of us that were physically there, Whether you were there as a teenager in 1987, whether you're like myself, 21 and maybe slightly older, and that album dropped, it was like, look, one day that album did not exist. Then overnight, that first Sign of the Times single dropped. And then not long after that was the album. And these songs were unfolding in real time for us. And like I said, it holds whatever you were doing in 1987. Again, and especially if it was something positive, or the majority of it was positive. I had ups and downs or whatever, but overall 1987 as a whole was just near perfect. And like I said, that was the perfect album. It was Prince, but it was slightly different, or it was different, or it went to a whole nother level in a lot of places. So, and again, a lot of us have had memories of having the cassette or having the vinyl, and just how great the sound was then on those two forms of physical media. And then we ended up with the CD, and it was like trying to, on a sonic level, as the, CD players got better, as the speakers got better, the CD itself didn't. And so for a lot of years, we've just had to live with it. Yes, I want to hear Sign of the Times, and it's like we hear it, but there's that sonic frustration in the back of our heads that it's like, yeah, this used to sound better, and we deserve better. And we're watching everybody else get 20-bit remastering, 24-bit remastering, and remaster on top of remaster on top of remaster. And granted, we would like to have this under different circumstances, but since it is what it is right now, and everything is so heavy, that again, this is sort of, like I said, if you're a fan of a later era, if you're a fan of just the revolution, if you're just a fan of whatever period, and celebrate that, and if that's what's keeping you at peace, keeping you calm, how you dealing with things, that's cool. But this is it for us right now. This is what's going on. And we're going to be this way until, whether it's Warner Brothers announcing a Parade Super Deluxe, we're going to be the same way. Or whatever Sony decides to drop first, whether it's another reissue, which is obviously later period stuff, or whatever they decide to start with first and still have the remaining Warner Brothers classic catalog, it's all going to be a celebration. We're all going to celebrate. Again, like I said, I wouldn't mind having Artificial Age on vinyl. I know that's kind of hard to find, I think, right now. But yeah, like I said, that album, 2014, it's now in my top 5 of Prince albums. So, but like I said, I know that we are not having Sign of the Times fatigue in any way, shape, or form. We're just going to keep this ball rolling. And like I said, we're going to try to ride this out of 2020. Shoot, forget 1999. We need to party like it's 2020, because, this feels like 1990. What the song 1999 is supposed to deal with. That's what 2020 feels like. And yep, we need to keep our spiritual centers and, do what we need to do to ride this out and survive it. And we definitely have to do this together. So with that being said, the live New Year's Eve DVD, what do you think about it? You still riding this super deluxe wave with it? Have you, are you too busy with the vault tracks to really spend time with this DVD? I know I have to sit down and really, study it. I almost wish it was a standalone release so I could have that sort of time to focus on it. But it's like, oh man, here's the DVD. But oh wait, I want to listen to this too. No, I need to hear Soul Psychedelicide. But wait, over here, no, I need to hear Blanche because Miles Marshall Lewis said it was great, and it is great. And it's like, man, I get to hear, all my dreams, and it's clear, and I get to hear Witness for the, and it's so much. But then it's like, man, I want to go back to 1987, so let me put on the original album, and it's like, oh yeah, it's 1987 again. But wait, what's that extra background vocal? Yeah, I don't remember hearing that. Man, that's great. Now I'm back in 2020, but it feels great because this sounds like it was just recorded yesterday now. So, let me know what you think about the live DVD. And we're going to end this episode right here. Don't forget to download and listen to this and other episodes of Amari Purple Talk on your favorite podcast platform. If you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also, visit AmariCommunications.com and check out current projects, future projects, buy some Amari Purple Talk merchandise, and other Amari merchandise such as the We Funk t-shirts. And as always, keep it purple and on the one.